It began with the hollow gleam of a family flaunting a life they didn't have. An expensive restaurant, glittering glasses, and well-rehearsed smiles. I parked my old car at the entrance, not caring that a few feet away, someone was showing off a rented luxury sports car. As I walked in, my wife's sister gave me that look of superiority she'd been practicing for years. I had barely sat down when she delivered the first jab, disguised as a joke. Still driving that poor man's car? How embarrassing to show up here in that thing. Her laughter mingled with her parents, while my wife just lowered her head, offering no defense. I didn't respond. It wasn't worth giving them the show they wanted. I simply took a sip of wine, but inside, I was boiling. I was used to these humiliations. Every gathering ended the same way, with them laughing at my expense and my wife staying silent to keep the peace with her family. Tonight was no different. Until the sister's fiancé, a seemingly quiet man, said something that froze the air. Casually, as he glanced at the menu, he commented, "By the way, thanks again for lending us the jet to go to the Caribbean. It was incredible." The silence was immediate. The laughter died in their throats. Every face tensed. Suddenly, the poor man at the table didn't seem so insignificant. My sister-in-law choked on her drink. My wife looked up in disbelief, and her parents stared at me as if they'd just discovered the beggar they despised was hiding gold under his rags. The sister tried to recover, nervously saying there must be some misunderstanding, but her fiancé, with no ill intent, buried her even deeper. "I don't understand. You didn't know he has a private jet? He flew us to St. Martin 2 months ago. It was a perfect trip." I said nothing. I just set my fork down on the plate and looked at them calmly, enjoying the uncomfortable silence that, for the first time, didn't belong to me. It belonged to them. The father cleared his throat. The mother forced a smile, but the strain was obvious. The sister pressed her lips together as if trying to swallow her own words, and my wife watched me, her expression a confused mix of shame and discovery. I didn't need to raise my voice or offer any explanations. The weight of that unexpected truth was enough to turn the tables in an instant. The air grew thick, as if no one knew where to look. My wife's sister struggled to maintain a fake smile, trying to downplay what her fiancé had said. "You must have him confused with someone else," she stammered. "He doesn't have anything like that." The man looked at her, puzzled as to why she would deny something so obvious. "What do you mean, no? We flew on his private jet. You were with me. Have you already forgotten?" The discomfort settled over the table like a shroud. My wife's parents couldn't take it anymore and asked me directly, "Is it true? Do you own a private jet?" The mother was leaning forward, as if she'd finally found something interesting about me. I let out a short, dry laugh and answered calmly, "Yes, it's mine. But I never mentioned it, because people who measure others by the car they drive or the clothes they wear don't deserve to know what lies beneath." I didn't raise my voice or embellish a thing. The sentence hit harder than any shout. My wife stared at me as if she were seeing a stranger. She couldn't understand why I had kept it a secret for so long. Her eyes held a mixture of shame, surprise, and a hint of guilt for all the times she had let her family ridicule me. The sister, unable to sustain the lie, dropped her gaze to her plate, twisting her napkin in her hands. The fiancé, however, now looked at me with an unexpected respect, like someone who realizes they have gravely underestimated an important person. No one touched their first course. The silverware lay untouched. The wine grew warm in the glasses, and the only thing filling the space was that cold, heavy silence. Every passing second was a reminder of how foolish their game of humiliation had been. I remained serene, enjoying, for the first time, seeing them squirm, unable to find a single word to soften the scene. It was the father who tried to salvage the moment, asking if I planned to do business with the jet, if I rented it out or just used it for personal travel. I looked him straight in the eye and replied flatly, I use it as I please. I don't owe you any explanations. I went back to cutting a piece of steak and brought it to my mouth, as if nothing had happened. That indifference was more painful to them than any speech of superiority could have been. The dinner was ruined, and everyone knew it. The table was no longer a stage for mockery, but a ring where no one dared to look up at me. The sister, who minutes before had been cackling and calling me poor, couldn't form a single word. Her fiancé watched her with a look of disappointment and surprise, as if seeing for the first time how ridiculous she was when she tried to crush others. My wife, in her silence, seemed to be replaying every occasion she had left me to face her family's insults alone. The shame was burning on her face. I did nothing to ease the tension. On the contrary, I leaned back in my chair and savored the reversal. It's funny, I said calmly. When you thought I had nothing, you laughed in my face. Now that you know one small detail, you're all silent. I didn't raise my voice, but every word landed like a lead weight. The fiancé nodded slightly, as if he understood the point perfectly. The sister shrank further into her seat, all her former arrogance gone. The father, who had always been the first to join in the jokes, changed his posture. His tone, once haughty, became measured. He asked with feigned respect about my projects and travels, as if he suddenly needed my approval. It was almost pathetic to watch him go from judge to supplicant in a matter of minutes. The mother, who had maintained an air of superiority until then, lowered her eyes every time our gazes met. My wife looked at me differently. It was no longer shame that filled her eyes, but something closer to remorse. Perhaps she finally understood that her complicit silence had made me an easy target for her family. Now, with a single revelation, their entire charade had collapsed. The tension in her expression made it clear she was beginning to question herself. I ended the scene with a line I let fall like a final judgment. Whoever mocks you when they think you have nothing doesn't deserve to be by your side when they discover you have everything. No one dared to answer. The roles had been reversed. I, the object of ridicule, had become the center of their forced respect. And they, who had always believed themselves superior, were now choking on their own pride in a heavy, suffocating silence. What happened in that restaurant didn't stay within those four walls. As is always the case in families who live by appearances, someone told the story, and it spread like wildfire. Within days, cousins, aunts, and acquaintances all knew that my wife's sister had ridiculed me, calling me poor, without knowing I owned a private jet. The gossip circulated with added details, each version crueler to her. What was once her arrogance was now a source of mockery. At the next family gathering, the atmosphere was entirely different. No one approached me with snide laughs. This time, there was a respect disguised as cordiality. The sister's fiancé was the first to greet me with a firm handshake. almost as if trying to erase the secondhand embarrassment he had witnessed. The sister, on the other hand, couldn't meet my gaze. She just hid behind her wine glass. I didn't have to say a word. The memory of that dinner spoke for me. The greatest irony was that the ridicule had been turned on its head. I overheard two aunts whispering, "How dare she call someone with a jet poor? How ridiculous!" She, who had always sought everyone's applause, had ended up as the punchline. Meanwhile, her fiancé raised his glass and toasted me, publicly acknowledging what his future wife had tried to minimize. The parents, uncomfortable, began to change their tune. The father, who in the past would question me about the clothes I wore, now asked about my projects with an uncharacteristic deference. The mother, unable to let go of her pride, offered tense, forced smiles, but it was clear they could no longer look down on me. The story had turned against them, and there was no going back. That night, while the others spoke in hushed tones, I didn't have to lift a finger to defend myself. The episode had already become a tattoo on the family's memory. The sister lost her power to humiliate me. Her credibility had crumbled. What was once laughter at my expense was now laughter at hers. And I, in silence, enjoyed the public downfall of the one who thought she'd always have the last word. In the weeks that followed, the dinner became a family legend. All it took was for someone to mention the word car, and the memory of my old car and the jet would inevitably surface. No one dared to bring it up directly, but the knowing glances and suppressed smiles said it all. The sister, who had always enjoyed mocking others, now carried the weight of her own humiliation. My wife began to change. At subsequent gatherings, whenever someone tried to make a comment at my expense, she would be the one to shut it down. "That's enough. Don't make foolish comparisons," she'd say with a new firmness. Her past silence haunted her, and she seemed determined to make up for it. I neither corrected nor thanked her. I understood it was something she had to do for herself, a settling of accounts with her own conscience. Her parents never laughed at me again either. There were no apologies, but their treatment became more measured, as if they were walking on glass whenever they spoke to me. They never openly admitted their mistake, but the discomfort in their gestures gave them away. As for me, I never mentioned the jet again. I didn't boast about trips, or photos, or luxuries. I didn't need to. I knew the memory of that night weighed more than any ostentatious display. Silence was my weapon, and it was their punishment. I let them be the ones to remember, over and over, how their jaws had dropped in the face of a truth they never saw coming. The lesson was etched in stone. Appearances are fragile, and arrogance comes at a high price. The sister learned that her laughter could be turned against her. My in-laws understood that respect cannot be faked, and my wife discovered that silence can also be a betrayal. I didn't need revenge. It was enough to watch how, every time someone remembered the car and the jet, the entire family would look down and fall silent. My wife was never the same after that night. Something in her broke, as if she had finally seen, with perfect clarity, what it meant to stand by, silently, while I endured those humiliations. She no longer laughed, with her parents or her sister, when the jokes were directed at me. Now, she was the first to cut off any malicious comment at the root. Don't repeat such foolishness, she once told her sister at a gathering, leaving her frozen in front of everyone. For the first time, she had defended me without hesitation. This change wasn't immediate or perfect. At first, she seemed uncomfortable, as if fighting against years of habit. But gradually, the firmness became natural. She understood that her past silence had been complicity, and she was determined not to repeat it. With me, things changed too. She began to ask more about my projects, my plans, even things that had never interested her before. She wasn't doing it to impress me, but because, somehow, she wanted to earn back the respect she had lost. I never threw her past in her face, but I didn't offer easy comfort either. I let her understand that dignity isn't recovered overnight. Seeing this change, her sister became more hostile. "So now you're his lawyer?" she said once, her voice laced with venom. My wife simply ignored her. That gesture was worth more than 1,000 words. She understood that defending me wasn't about taking my side against her family, but about taking the right side. And though her relationship with them grew strained, she didn't back down. I watched her in silence. I didn't need thanks or promises. It was enough to see that she had learned, through a harsh dose of reality, that staying silent can be just as damaging as casting the first stone. Her loyalty was now clear, born not of fear, but of the awareness of what had been at stake, my respect and her own. Over time, I discovered that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. There was no need to show off trips or bank statements. The real victory was in the calm, in not reacting to the first provocation, and letting the facts speak for themselves. That one night in the restaurant was enough to tear down years of accumulated mockery. What had once been easy laughs at my expense became uncomfortable memories that each of them would carry forever. And the most ironic part is that I did nothing. My silence, my patience, and their own clumsiness were the weapons that sealed their defeat. The entire family changed how they treated me, not out of affection or remorse, but out of fear of being made to look foolish again. It was obvious in the way they spoke to me, measuring every word, avoiding any comment that might sound condescending. And that hypocrisy, far from bothering me, served as a constant reminder that forced respect stings more than any rebuke. My wife understood this, and though she tried to mend what was broken, she knew the wound of her silence would not be erased by belated gestures. The lesson wasn't just for them, it was for her too. The sister was marked by it. She couldn't look me in the eye for a long time. The fiancé, in contrast, sought me out with a certain admiration, like a man who recognizes the difference between empty pride and true strength. I even heard that within her own circle of friends, more than one pointed to her as the woman who tried to ridicule the owner of the jet. That label followed her, turning her into a punchline, an example of how arrogance can shatter your own image in a single moment. I didn't need to seek revenge. The public ridicule had already destroyed her more thoroughly than I ever could have planned. Inside, what gave me the deepest satisfaction wasn't their silence, but my own. To have endured humiliation without stooping to their level, to have waited without shouting or begging for respect. That is what ultimately turned everything in my favor. I understood that true power isn't about immediately crushing someone who laughs at you, but in letting them expose themselves. in allowing their own venom to poison them in front of everyone. That patience, which so many mistook for weakness, became the very tool that returned my dignity tenfold. In the end, that family learned something I already knew. Easy laughter fades, but the weight of silence endures. I didn't need to scream that I was more than the man with the old car. Their own faces showed it when they discovered they had been laughing at someone they could never hope to reach. And that was my victory. Not to boast, not to debase myself, not to fall into their game. I simply let them sink alone into the echo of their own faded laughter. The memory of that dinner never faded. Months passed, then years, and it was still present at every gathering, though no one dared to mention it directly. A mere mention of travel or vehicles was enough for a heavy silence to fall over the room, as if a shadow had passed over them all. I never said a word. I didn't have to. They carried the shame of having shown the worst of themselves in front of me. The echo of that humiliation remained alive, more powerful than any speech. My wife changed over time. Her relationship with her family grew cold, and though she continued to visit them, it was no longer with the same ease or lightness. She realized they weren't a refuge, but a cage where she, too, had learned to be silent. Now, when she came back from those visits, she was more serious, less proud, aware that true respect is not inherited or demanded, but built. I watched her in silence, understanding that she had woken up late, but at least she had woken up. The sister, on the other hand, never quite recovered. Her fiancé eventually left her, tired of her attitude. I heard, through stray comments, that the relationship ended shortly after that infamous dinner. And though she tried to blame me, no one believed her. The truth is, she needed no enemies. Her own tongue had been her executioner. From being the pride of the family, she became the woman who was pointed at, marked by a single sentence she had thrown out, which came back to her like a boomerang. Over time, the parents learned to look at me differently. It wasn't affection or closeness, but a caution that hadn't existed before. They never apologized. Their pride was too heavy a burden. But in every measured gesture, every carefully chosen word, it was clear the balance of power had shifted for good. Now, they were the ones who avoided bothering me, not because they had learned to respect me, but because they understood that any slight could now backfire on them. For me, that was enough. Today, I still don't show off. I drive my old car when I feel like it, and I take the jet when I decide to, explaining myself to no one. I learned that true power lies not in what you possess, but in the ability to remain silent while others bury themselves. That dinner became an eternal warning for all of them. Whoever mistakes humility for weakness ends up paying a steep price. I needed no revenge because the memory of their own mockery turning into shame was the most perfect punishment. And now, whenever someone at that table tries to ridicule another, a simple mention of the car and the jet is enough for the laughter to die before it can even begin.